the sprinkling of the water was the flood. Not necessarily that they would rise again per se, but just that the world would be purified. I think that the Dur HaFlaga didn't rise from the dead, if I'm not mistaken, right, Moshe? The Dur HaMabul did rise from the dead, or Hafuch? There's a Rashi coming up here pretty soon. Okay. Anyway. Okay, so after all this, we can see why these waters are called the waters of Noach, because from them comes a great rest. There comes a purity. In other words, they really were a good thing. They weren't just waters of destruction, these Mayim Rabim. Because if he wanted to destroy, he could have destroyed elsewhere. The fact that it came in water was a way of purifying the world, and it was therefore a rest, so to speak, from this contamination. So this enslavement to making a living, which is called, in the Torah's word, it's called enslave. It's also called Mei Noach, as we said in the very beginning of the Mimer, that all the burdens of making a parnasa and like being troubled with all your running around like crazy in the world, this is called Mayim Rabim. This is like the heavy waters, the mighty waters coming in. And therefore, it's also called Mei Noach, which we see has a positive connotation to it. It's a purifier. The Kamaim Razal, the sages said, Avram Avinu shibud neg Gehenim. Hashem gave Avram a choice. If he wanted his children and the punishment that was like sort of destined to come to them, to come in the form of Gehenim or slavery, Gullus. Shibud. And he chose Shibud. He chose basically Avram Avinu. He chose Gullus. So it was much lighter of a sentence than Gehenna. So we see here that, why are we making this comparison? Because just like just like it's impossible for the soul to come into Gan Eden, and to enjoy once again the rays of the Shekhinah and return where it came from, until it first goes to Gehenna, because they won't let the soul come into Gan Eden unless it purifies itself through Gehenna, the fires of Gehenna, the waters of Gehenna, whatever, there's different types of Gehenna. There was a Tana, the Chaver of Rabbi Meir, that became a heretic. He was one of those that went and looked into the Pardes, right? He looked up and he went up on a little soul mission. 4 people went up into the Pardes, and he became a heretic. It made him crazy, basically. He became a heretic. And even though he was a Tana, he was filled with Torah. So much so that even after he became a heretic, there's a famous story that Rabbi Meir would still learn from him. He's a Machal Shabbos before Hesti, and he was like a wicked person, basically. But he so was filled with Torah that on Shabbos, Rabbi Meir would go, he would be riding on a horse, which you're not allowed to do, and Rabbi Meir would be walking next to him, learning Torah from him the whole time, until they walked so far that he went out of the Shabbos Techum, you're not allowed to go anymore. And Rabbi Meir would say, like, okay, like, I'll say, see you later. But he was so filled with Torah. But the problem is, if your Torah is impure like that, you can't go to Gan Eden. And the problem is that if he would be able to go to Gan Eden and see the reward of his Torah, he would be in like the highest chambers of Gan Eden, but he was stuck. So it says that he was being burned and judged, so to speak, for all these years. But there's different levels. There's even getting to Gan Eden, to Gehenna, is already a certain, you have to get a key to get in there. There's nether worlds before Gehenna that you don't necessarily get out. You could like be sort of flipping around doing all kinds of crazy things, because once you get into Gehenna, you're in, you serve your time, and then you go into Gan Eden. And it's basically it's a purifier, and it works in a certain amount of time.
Everybody has a different set of time?
Yeah, depending. But not everyone, so to speak, merits to go into Gan Eden, to Gehenna, because you could be like, kind of in this nether region. So even generations after he died, there was, I think it was Amoraim, it's like mamash, like 100 years later or something like that, they came to Acher's grave, they called him Acher, they didn't want to mention his name anymore. They came to his grave and there was still smoke coming up out of his grave, like of him just like suffering basically. So they said over there, Mutav Diludaine Veleis La'almud Asi. They said, you know what, it's better that he should already be judged already, so they can bring him to the world to come. So in other words, they were basically praying for him to be put into Gehenna, so that he would be able, but Gehenna is horrible, it's worse than where he was. But it's better for him to go into Gehenna and finally get judged, so that he can reap the amazing rewards of his Torah, which is what he would have when he got to Gan Eden. So what do we see from here? That Gehenna is a purifier. And Avram Avinu shows...
Not with water.
Sometimes there's a Gehenna of water also, but whatever. He says that, well, here he says, V'gam litvul b'nahar dinur. It's also called making a toiveling, having a mikveh in a river of fire. It's another type of Gehenna. So you have to, in other words, just like a person goes to a mikveh in this world, when you go to a mikveh, what you're basically doing is you're cutting yourself off from your life force. You're cutting yourself off from the air, right? So same thing with like a conversion, right? So the idea of going to a mikveh, why is it you go into a mikveh? Is when you come up, it's like you're taking your first breath. You were just out of life, essentially, and now you've been reborn. So a ger ha-nisgayr is like a tinok shenolan. It's like a child that's just been born, right? So too, every day, that's why we go to the mikveh every day, Hasidic. Because basically we want to have this experience that every day you're completely purified and you're a new person. Well, up there they have a mikveh of fire. They dip into the Nahar Dinor, which means, in Aramaic, it means a river of fire. And the whole point is that it's not just punishment. Just like this floodwaters is not just punishment. It's purification. It's a kindness, really. It's Mayim Noach. So that you can go where you have to go, so that you could go into Gan Eden.
My rabbi told me that the beginning spirit anguish that we feel the Hashem down.
Oh yeah, that's what you experience up there, you're saying. Or even in this world. Alright, Al-Levi, that was the real Gehenna. Would that it would be that was the real Gehenna. I mean, I hope you're right.
There is, maybe there's different types of Gehenna. Maybe there's a lower Gehenna and maybe there's an upper Gehenna.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. In fact, the word Gehenna, Gehinom, means the valley of Hinnom. Hinnom was a guy. And there's right outside Yerushalayim, it's still called that today. There's a valley called Hinnom, Gehinom. And it's where they would do a lot of idol worships in the times when there was the destruction. In other words, there's definitely everything which is Lamaila has its corresponding Lamata. But why did Avram Avinu choose Gullus instead of Gehenna? Because it was so much lighter. I think they say that the fires of Gehenna are 400 times or 200 times stronger than the fires of this world, basically. Which means that there is something of like a Gehenna here, but in the spiritual realms, everything is on a whole other realm of actualization. So the point is that what do we see from here? Avram Avinu, when he chose Gullus and Shibud over Gehenna, fine, so it was a little bit better than Gehenna. But the point is that why do you have those two choices? Because they basically are the same thing, just one version of the other one. One's lighter version of the other one. What is Gehenna at the end of the day? It's not punishment. It's purification. And therefore, what do we see from here? That Gullus, or Shibud HaParnasa, like being a slave to making your Parnas, and all the bothers and all the toil and the trouble that comes in, and you're on the phone and this deal falls through and that one and all this stuff, it's like Gehenna in this way that it's a purification process. It's called Mei Noach. It's the waters of purity that purify your soul, basically. Shibud. This is what it means that through what is it called? Gullus, basically. You can go much, much higher than you could if you didn't have these troubles. Just like this, they told Acher, go ahead and judge him, because going through that will elevate him to levels of Gan Eden. Same thing is true. All these burdens in our lives, through them, they elevate us to a higher place. V'hinei shibud eina peresh ma sheyesh aleinu ata melech. What does it mean, shibud? Servitude. It doesn't mean like what we have now. I guess what Alter Rebbe had then, we have it a little bit. There's a king over us. V'shenoto meitanu mas, and he takes from us taxes. Right? He says that's not what it means, servitude, or this word that we're calling shibud. He says shagam bizman beis hamikdash haya aleinu melech Yisrael, because even when there was a temple and the world was in the greatest heights, there was also a king who was upon us, and there was also a tax. V'hamas haya beyoser, and there was a huge tax that the king used to take from us. Ki yadu shechelek asiri utzrich kol echad liten, 1/10 of everything you own you have to give to the king. That was excluding what you had to give 1/10 to the Levi and the Truma and everything else. Just 1/10 to the king. Ella. So that's not what it means to be enslaved, just to have a king. Ella kavana hi shebizman beis hamikdash haya kayam, when the temple was standing, haya nimshach bracha v'hashpa atzuma. There was, in the times of the temple, there was a tremendous amount of bracha and shefa in the world. Ad she'eretz Yisrael haya eretz zavas chalav davash. To the point that Eretz Yisrael was literally flowing with milk and honey. There was an ample amount of blessing and goodness. Shalo al pi teva klal, which was completely not even natural. As it says in the Gemara, Sof Masechtas Ksubos, v'lo haya klal daigas v'tiras haparnasa. At that time, there was not worries about making a living. No one necessarily had the flood waters coming in at that time in the same way, because even if they gave a lot of... So in other words, shibud doesn't just mean that there's someone above you. It means worries, basically. Being enslaved means you're worried, right? You have serious concerns. How am I going to pay this bill? What am I going to do to eat? All these things. Someone just stole everything I own. All these types of worries, they're called the floodwaters. It's not just that you have someone over you who's taking your tax, because that could be that you're still basically okay. Now, yesh lekol echad ve'echad yigius v'tirus haparnasa. Each one of us has our toil and our burdens of the parnasa lasog b'inyan yolam hazeh hagashmi, to deal with this physical world. It's not giving infinite bracha in a supernatural way like it was in the times of the temple. V'hu b'chinas Mayim Rabim hanal. And this is what it means, this mighty waters. And at the same time, nikra mei Noach. This is called the waters of Noach. These are called purifying, elevating waters. Shu b'chinas naicha derucha. This is like a peaceful spirit. It's a restful spirit that it can give you. The fisha ayde b'chinas Mayim Rabim hanal means al lis neshama l'madriga hayoser gavoa mikodem nislav shusa. And that's because through these waters, the soul can elevate to a higher place than before it was when it was standing in its supernal home, before it entered into a physical body. So before we said, we were trying to explain that it was benefiting from the rays of the Shekhinah and how awesome that was. Everyone was sitting around watching the Shekhinah TV. But now he's saying, really, that level itself, he says it's only benefiting from the rays of the Shekhinah there. And there's how great it must be, but nonetheless, there's a staying of the stages.